Welcome to Focus Strategy Application. The objective of this lesson is to apply the key focus strategy concepts to your particular organization using the worksheets. Specifically, you'll identify the goals related to the 7 organization areas, then integrate the natural environment into the strategic goals, then diagram the relationships between the strategic goals and make your business logic, your strategy explicit. And finally, identify the strategy outputs, measures, action plans, and a leader for each strategic goal. We start with the focus strategy framework and the goals at the top level. So, beginning with the customer goals, identify the goals to improve customer satisfaction and the customer experience, and thus their behavior in repeat business and referrals. Then identify goals to improve the product performance and the services and the experience of the customer, and the operational performance and support that's needed to actually produce those improved products and services. Then identify the goals for supplier and partner performance that, if they achieve those, would help the production goals and the product and service goals, and in turn the customer goals. Once you've got the value chain goals identified, then identify the goals and the workforce capability, capacity, engagement, and well-being that would support all of the supplier, production, product and service, and customer goals. Then identify the goals that address the improvement of the knowledge management and information systems and the data analysis. And then identify the goals that focus on improving the strategic performance, not already identified in the other areas. And these are going to include probably the financial goals and targets. And then at the end, identify the goals that address the natural environment, energy sources, usage, waste, and any social responsibility goals. So using some healthcare examples, the types of goals we're talking about are in customer goals, something like enhance the continuum of care for all patients. You're going to want this to be measurable, of course, and you're eventually going to put measures to it. Goals that might support that from a product are improving the efficiency of the healthcare service delivery processes. And maybe the production goals back in that would improve the product and service and customer would be improving the efficiency of healthcare operations by 5% maybe. And these are just examples of things that might go and make sense to build the connections between the goals. From a supplier perspective, maybe the goal is to reduce the number of medical supplies returned for quality defects, and thus helping improve the efficiency of healthcare operations. From a workforce perspective, you may have a couple goals to help out, like improving workforce satisfaction and engagement, which tends to improve all the other goals across the board. Sometimes it's difficult to make an explicit connection, direct connection between workforce goals, but there are typically connections and a lot of research behind different aspects of workforce results that support and enhance the execution of the business and eventually the revenue. And you may have goals around developing processes to assess the capabilities and capacity of your workforce so that you can better manage, develop, and the workforce. For knowledge and information goals, you may have goals like sustaining, enhancing core performance measures and sustaining, enhancing patient experience metrics with comparisons. So the gaps in your scorecard and the gaps in your metrics and your analysis that are inhibiting you from both executing the well for the customer and improving processes throughout the organization are candidates for knowledge and information goals that would enhance and improve all the goals. From a leadership perspective, one goal might be improving the percentage of reimbursement to the maximum allowable. This would be a financial type goal, and improving the affordability of healthcare services. And you would need to get more explicit and identify metrics for these as well. And the governance goals could include things like increasing the dollars from recycling by 10%, or increasing to 50% electricity from solar panels and things like that. So To complete your own framework, you're going to want to download the blank framework as usual and identify the strategic goals for each of the 7 strategic framework areas. Again, if you're doing this by yourself, sometimes people use the mini post-it notes and or write in the framework. But if you're doing it as a group and using existing documents and your existing goals and identifying where they go, some organizations will use a whiteboard and use a group. And so what they'll do is draw this framework on a whiteboard or a flip chart and then use the larger post-it notes and as a group work through. Typically, you're going to end up with gaps. Most organizations that do this for the first time and try to identify their strategy and explicit goals in all of these areas find out that they may have customer goals and they may have product goals, but maybe they don't have any supplier goals that are needed to help out, or maybe workforce goals. So you'll often find that there's gaps. And even if there's not complete gaps in an entire box out of the 7 boxes, oftentimes there's gaps in the strategy, and we'll get to that from the system diagram here in a minute. Once you've got the framework developed, you're going to want to take that around and show it to your colleagues, boss, subordinates, get feedback, get input. You may even go to some of the stakeholders and get their input. But typically in this first round, and if you've doing this for the first time and looking at how the goals match up with the framework, oftentimes your inside group knows enough about the strategy and the framework to get the job done the first time. And you're going to want to incorporate and go through this a couple of times until you work through the issues and get a complete framework. Of course, you're not going to fill in the gaps right now, probably, but the next time you develop strategy or go through a strategy process, that would be the time to look at the current strategy and how it fits and maybe develop more complete strategies. From a natural environment perspective and integrating that, it's fairly straightforward, and oftentimes in early phases, this will be done as a separate exercise that is on top of your other strategy. And eventually, organizations will start integrating and embedding this in the strategies and start asking these questions every time they have an initiative. What are the sources of energy and materials? What are the usage options and the waste that comes from that? And so there's 2 ways to look at this. One is to integrate these in every initiative that you're doing, the other, and maybe goal that you're doing. But the other way is to look at it from across the organization and take a big picture look. And so taking a big picture look, when the first question is to identify the energy and material sourcing goals for each part of the organization. And examples of this might be converting 30% of your retail locations to solar power in the next 12 months. It's a number that you can manage to. It's got a time with it. Maybe another one would be source 50% of new materials and components from solar powered suppliers and work with suppliers to help them convert their operations to solar power. So you're looking at the entire supply chain from beginning to end and identifying ways to make different choices on the types of power and energy you're using and or materials. The next question and area to address is to identify the energy and materials usage goals for each part of the organization. So how are you going to use these, the materials and energy? One way may be to decrease the packaging materials for shipping products by 30%. That not only saves materials, but it saves shipping weight and thus fuel and shipping cost along the way. Decreasing transportation distances by 50% through buy local programs. Not only does this reduce the amount of energy you need to move stuff around, it also supports the local economy and the communities you're operating in, and it can save you a lot of money in the end. And then maybe another example is reduce the electricity usage by 25% at the non-solar supplied locations over the next 12 months. So while you're converting part of your retail locations and choosing solar power for 30%, maybe some of the other ones you work on reducing the energy usage until you get them converted. And even then, it would be beneficial to reduce the energy usage. But while you're using less clean power, one way to improve the situation is to reduce the usage or the amount used. And finally, identify the energy and materials waste and recycling goals for each part of the organization. These things might include things like increasing the amount of money you get from recycling by 10% of the old products for the next 12 months. And what many organizations have found is that they're throwing away money oftentimes, and they can actually make money by recycling some of the things. Source 50% of new materials and components from suppliers that have recycling programs built in so that they can take back the old product and or the waste and recycle it themselves. And finally, work with suppliers to develop recycling programs at all locations. These are just examples of goals from organizations that are addressing their energy and materials sourcing selection, the usage, and the waste and recycling. So to complete your own worksheet for the natural environment, as always, download it from this website and then identify the sources, usage, and waste all the way across the organization for the goals and present that to your colleagues, boss, subordinates, and get their feedback, and then incorporate that feedback and revise and refine the strategy. Once you have the strategic goals framework filled out and the natural environment integrated and those goals identified, the next step is useful to actually identify the system. And we used an example in the key concepts lesson where if you wanted to increase revenue and grow the top line, two ways to do that are to increase repeat purchase rate and increase referrals. And in order to do that, maybe you have to improve customer service. And in order to do that, improve the online customer service platform, improve workforce development programs and customer service training. And in order to do that, maybe you need more measurement and feedback to understand how to improve customer service training and also how to improve the execution of customer service itself. And so this is making the logic explicit, or your business rationale. And while it's useful to use the 7-box framework and see where the gaps are, and the table for the natural environment and see where you have gaps, it's also useful to take the goals that you have and trace them backwards and see if you've got a set of goals that create a system that work together. So sometimes organizations will have a customer goal and then none of the other goals are actually supporting it. So the question becomes, how are you going to achieve that customer goal if you don't have the other goals identified that when you achieve those will support the customer goal, similar to the case here in the example. And so the task here is to download the system strategy system application worksheet and probably make multiple copies and work through the different strategies that you have and identify and diagram them. And then once you get them made explicit, you can identify gaps and have conversations with your colleagues, and maybe your boss and subordinates, to talk through those plans and again, identify the gaps and areas that could be improved upon in order to make the goals more successful and make your organization more successful. And then incorporate everything into some revised diagrams. And those diagrams, along with the framework and the table for the environment, all are inputs to future strategic planning processes. So the last worksheet number 4, in this lesson are the strategy outputs. And so for each goal and objective that you currently have, you're going to want to identify the measures that you're measuring to know whether you're making progress on the goal and identify any targets for those metrics that are associated with the short and longer term. And identify the action plans that you expect once you complete those action plans on new initiatives, that the measures will show the results that will tell us that we've met our goals. And finally, identify the leader for each goal and objective. And sometimes you'll have a leader for each action plan. So, but it's often useful to have an executive sponsor for each goal. And then you may have project leaders for the action plans. Either way, you need somebody that's responsible and accountable for accomplishing the targets, the action plan's targets and goals. And you do that for each one. So you identify one goal from the strategy, then identify the measures for that goal, then the key actions, and then identify the person responsible. So for a quick example, maybe it's improve the percentage of reimbursement to the maximum allowable from our previous example. And maybe the metrics are the percent of reimbursement per year, and your action plans, maybe you've put together a clinical outcomes cross-functional improvement team and assign Dr. Joe Smith, the chief medical officer, to be the person that's in charge of that and responsible. That's just an example of filling out this chart. So to complete your own strategy output, and there's only 3 rows on this worksheet, so you may need to make multiple copies to account for all your goals. Download it and then put all the outputs into the worksheet and share that with colleagues, boss, and subordinates, and talk about the potentially the gaps and the places. Maybe you don't have all the action plans you need to accomplish a goal. Maybe you don't have the metrics in place to measure accomplishing the goal. So oftentimes what the table and the worksheet will help you do is illuminate gaps that you have and or inconsistencies or disconnects between the metrics, the goal, and the action plans. And use that to revise the action plans and the outputs. And after you've got that complete, you're ready to move on to the assessment lesson and assess the application of focus strategy to your organization. So we'll see you there.